There's a part of you that you have never shown anyone. Not your partner, not your closest friend, not even the version of yourself you see when you look in the mirror on your best days. It lives quietly, beneath everything, behind every role you play, every mask you wear, every version of yourself you've carefully constructed for the world to see and accept. And here is the thing that Carl Jung understood, that almost no one else has ever dared to say out loud. That hidden part of you, it is not your darkness. It is your gold. Look at the 4 images in front of you right now. 4 people, 4 moments, 4 different ways that a human being hides the most powerful part of themselves from the world. Option A figure standing alone, holding a flame, smiling, but hiding what that flame is truly for. Option B, a person in a crowd, mouth open, screaming with everything they have, and not a single person around them is listening. Option C, 2 hands pressed flat against the door from the inside, pushing, holding it shut, keeping something locked away that desperately wants to breathe. Option D, a person standing before a mirror, covering their own face with their hands, unable or unwilling to look at what is truly reflected back. I want you to sit with these images for a moment. Don't think about which one looks most dramatic. Don't choose the one you think sounds interesting. I want you to feel it. Which one, when you looked at it, created a small, quiet tightening somewhere in your chest? Which one made you look away for just a second before coming back? Because that instinctive response, that small flinch, that brief recognition, that is not random. That is your psyche pointing at something real. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you about whichever image you chose is something that most people spend their entire lives never understanding about themselves. Before I reveal what your choice means, I need to tell you something that Carl Jung said, something that most psychology textbooks leave out entirely, because it is deeply uncomfortable and because it demands something from you. Jung said this: the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not to accept your flaws, not to accept your failures, to accept yourself completely, including the parts you consider too much, too strange, too ambitious, too loud, too sensitive, too self-loving. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, not just the broken parts, not just the trauma, not just the things we regret, but the full architecture of what a human being actually is beneath the surface they show the world. And what he found disturbed him at first. Then it fascinated him. Then it became the cornerstone of everything he ever taught. He called it the shadow. Now you may have heard of the shadow before. Most people think the shadow is the dark side, the anger, the jealousy, the ugly instinct we don't want to admit to. And yes, those things are in the shadow. But Jung also discovered something that almost no one talks about. He discovered that the shadow also contains gold. He called it the golden shadow. And it is the most important psychological concept that the modern self-help world has almost completely ignored. Here is what it means. From the very earliest years of your life, before you had language to understand what was happening, you learned which parts of yourself were acceptable. You learned this not from textbooks, not from lessons. You learned it from reactions, from the way a parent's face changed, from the way a classroom went quiet, from the way love was given or withheld based on which version of you showed up that day, and the parts of you that were met with confusion, or discomfort, or punishment, or silence, those parts didn't disappear. The human psyche does not discard anything. Instead, those parts went underground. They moved into the shadow, into the dark, into the place inside you that the world never sees. But here's what makes the golden shadow different from everything else in your unconscious mind. The things you buried weren't weaknesses. They were strengths. They were gifts. They were the most alive, most original, most powerfully authentic expressions of who you actually are, and they were buried precisely because they were too real, too bright, too much the environment you were born into. Think about that for a moment. The thing you hide most desperately, it was hidden not because it was wrong. It was hidden because it was too right for the world you were handed. This is what Jung meant when he said the gold is in the dark. Not that there is something beautiful hiding in your trauma, but that your trauma was often built specifically around a gift, a capacity, a power, an authentic self-expression that someone, somewhere, made you afraid to claim. And now it lives behind one of those 4 doors. One of those 4 images you looked at a moment ago. Let's find out which one is yours. If you chose option A, the figure standing with a flame, smiling, holding something back, then what you have hidden from the world is the full, unapologetic truth of your ambition. Not just ambition in the professional sense. Something deeper than that. A hunger, a knowing, a feeling you have carried for years, maybe your entire life, that you are capable of something larger than what you are currently living. That there's a version of your life, a version of your impact, a version of your contribution to the world that you have never allowed yourself to speak out loud. Not even in your own private thoughts. Not fully, because the moment you let yourself feel the full size of it, something shuts it down. That shutdown has a history. People who choose option A almost always share one specific wound in common. At some point in your formation, in childhood, in adolescence, sometimes in early adulthood, you express your ambition openly. You said what you wanted. You claimed what you believed you were capable of, and the response you received was not encouragement. Maybe it was laughter. Maybe it was dismissive silence. Maybe it was a parent who told you to be realistic. Maybe it was a peer group who made you feel that wanting more made you arrogant, made you difficult, made you think too highly of yourself. Maybe the message was gentler than that, just a quiet, consistent lack of belief in the people whose belief mattered most. And you learned. The psyche is a brilliant student. It learned that the flame you were carrying made other people uncomfortable. And so you smiled. You kept the flame small. You held it behind your back where no one could see how large it actually burns. Jung would call this the suppression of the heroic archetype, the inner force that drives human beings toward their highest expression of self. When the hero is pushed into the shadow, it doesn't die. It waits, and it expresses itself in distorted ways, through restlessness, through a chronic sense that your life doesn't quite fit, through watching other people live boldly and feeling something between inspiration and grief that you can't quite name. The grief is a tell. You are not grieving someone else's success. You are grieving your own unlived life. Studies in achievement psychology consistently show that the highest performing individuals are not the ones with the most talent. They are the ones who were given, or who eventually gave themselves, explicit permission to want what they want without shame. The ambition was never the problem. The shame around the ambition was. What you have been hiding behind your back was never a problem to be managed. It was a power to be claimed. And this is what I want you to hear. If you chose option A, you were not being arrogant when you wanted more. You were being accurate. The flame you carry is real. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you are finally ready to stop hiding it. Now, if you chose option B, the person screaming in the crowd, surrounded by people, utterly unheard, then what you have hidden from the world is your voice. Not just your speaking voice. Your entire expressive self. The part of you that sees the world differently. The part of you that has things to say, real, specific, important, original things, that you have systematically suppressed for so long that you may have convinced yourself they were never there at all. You are, in some essential way that you have probably never fully admitted, a creator, an artist, a truth-teller, a person with perspective so particular, so genuinely your own, that it frightens you. Because the moment you express it fully, the moment you let your real voice out, unedited, uncensored, not shaped to be palatable or acceptable or safe, you know, on some deep level, that you will no longer be invisible. And visibility has felt dangerous for a very long time. People who choose option B almost always carry a silencing wound. Something happened, often repeatedly, over years, that taught you that your expression was a liability. Perhaps you were a child who spoke too freely and were punished for it. Perhaps you were creative and were told creativity was impractical. Perhaps you were honest and were told your honesty was a problem. Perhaps you were the one who saw through the room, who understood what was really happening beneath the surface of every family dynamic, every social situation, and learned that speaking that truth out loud made people angry. So you learned to scream on the inside, to have the full force of your expression happening beneath the surface, in the private theater of your own mind, while your external self remained careful, measured, appropriate. And here's the thing about screaming on the inside for long enough. It becomes exhausting in a way that looks, from the outside, like depression, like low energy, like apathy, when in reality it is the opposite of apathy. It is a person who cares intensely about truth, about expression, about being genuinely known, who has used enormous amounts of psychological energy for years to keep that caring contained. Jung described this as a suppression of the creative archetype, and he was unambiguous about the consequences. He wrote that neurosis, the psychological suffering that has no clear physical cause, is almost always a result of unlived life, of the parts of the self that were never permitted expression finding other, darker channel for their energy. Your anxiety, your unexplained sadness, your sense of being in the wrong life. These are not character flaws. They are the cost of a voice that has not yet been given permission to speak. What would happen if you let it out? Not the edited version. Not the version you shaped to be acceptable. The real one. I'll tell you what Jung would say. He would say it is the only thing that will actually make you feel alive. The crowd in your image is not ignoring you because your voice doesn't matter. The crowd is in the image to show you the fear that you will speak and not be heard, that you will create and be dismissed, that you will finally show your real self and the world will shrug. But here's what your image also shows. If you look closely, you are still screaming. After everything, after all the silencing, after all the years of making yourself smaller, you are still screaming. That means the voice is still there. It never left. It is waiting. If you chose option C, the two-hand pressed flat against the door, holding it shut from the inside, then what you have hidden from the world is your depth, specifically your need for solitude, for interior life, for silence and withdrawal, and the kind of rich, complex inner world that most people around you have probably never understood and may have actively pathologized. You are, at your core, a deeply interior person. You think in layers. You process slowly and profoundly. You need time alone not because you are antisocial, not because something is wrong with you, not because you are depressed or difficult or broken, but because you are built for depth, and depth requires stillness. And at some point in your life, that need for stillness was treated as a problem. Maybe you were called too quiet, too sensitive, too introverted. Maybe you were a child who needed time alone to recover from the intensity of social interaction, and the adult around you interpreted that need as something that required fixing. Maybe you were pushed consistently, persistently, toward more stimulation, more sociability, more external engagement, when everything in you was pulling in the opposite direction. And so you built the door, and you pressed your hands against it, not to keep the world out permanently, but to protect the one interior space where you were allowed to simply be what you actually are. Jung had a profound reverence for the interior life. He spent years in a period he called his own confrontation with the unconscious, deliberately withdrawing from the outer world to go deep into his own psyche. He built a stone tower by a lake and spent months there alone, in silence, simply listening to the interior. He did not consider this pathological. He considered it essential. He understood something that modern culture has almost entirely forgotten, that the capacity for deep solitude is not a deficit of social skill. It is a form of psychological strength that the extroverted world has never learned to measure. People who choose option C often describe a specific, recurring experience. They are in social situations, sometimes situations they genuinely enjoy. And beneath the surface, beneath the laughter and the connection, there is a quiet background sensation of performance, of translating themselves into a language that others can receive, of being present externally while managing a rich, complex, almost overwhelming interior experience that they have learned never to mention, because when they have mentioned it, they were often told it was too much, or that they were overthinking, or that they needed to relax, to get out of their head, to just be present. And what those well-meaning instructions communicated, over time, was that their natural mode of being, the deep, still, interior, contemplative self, was not welcome at the table. So they pressed it behind the door. They kept it for themselves. They built a private world of extraordinary richness and never invited anyone in. Here is what I want you to know. If you chose option C, your depth is not a burden. It is not a flaw in your social architecture. It is the very thing that makes you capable of insight, of genuine empathy, of the kind of understanding that most people spend their whole lives reaching for without ever arriving. The door does not need to stay shut forever. It needs to be opened slowly, carefully, and only for the people who have demonstrated that they can enter quietly. Not everyone can. That's not a reason to keep it shut. That's a reason to be more selective about who you let in. And if you chose option D, the person standing before a mirror, covering their own face with their hands, unable to look at what is reflected, then what you have hidden from the world is something so tender, so quietly radical that most people will not even recognize it as something that needs to be hidden. What you are hiding is the fact that you like yourself. Not in an arrogant way, not in a loud, self-promotional way that dominates social media and makes you slightly nauseous. In a quiet, private, specific way. There are things about who you are, the way your mind works, the way you love people, the particular quality of your character that you have, in your most private moments, recognized as genuinely good, as something worth being. And you have never told anyone, because on some deep, early level, you learn that self-acceptance, visible self-acceptance, own self-acceptance, would be punished. This is what Jung identified as one of the most sophisticated and damaging wounds in the human psyche. He called it the suppression of the self-archetype, the authentic, whole, integrated self that stands at the center of the individuated psyche. And it is suppressed not by self-hatred, but by the anticipation of what happens when it is seen. Think about where this came from. Were you a child who was genuinely comfortable in yourself, curious, alive, self-possessed, and were made to feel that this comfort was somehow presumptuous? Were you happy and made to feel that your happiness was naive? Were you proud of something and met with a response that made pride feel dangerous? Or perhaps it was more subtle than that. Perhaps you simply lived long enough in environments where visible self-worth was equated with arrogance, where the humble thing, the safe thing, the acceptable thing was to minimize yourself, to defer constantly, to speak about yourself only in the language of your failures and never your gifts. And so you covered your face in the mirror. You kept your self-acceptance private. You carried it alone, in the dark, like a secret so fragile that even speaking it out loud might break it. People who choose option D often have a specific, telling behavioral pattern. They are extraordinarily good at recognizing and naming the worth in other people. They will fight passionately for someone else's right to be seen, valued, and celebrated. But the moment someone tries to do the same for them, the moment someone looks them directly in the eyes and says you are genuinely remarkable, something inside them deflects, changes the subject, makes a self-deprecating joke, goes somewhere safe and small. That deflection is not humility. It is protection. It is a reflex built from years of learning that being seen fully, including being seen as good, was not safe. Jung wrote that the most radical act a human being can perform is to stand before themselves without judgment and say, "This is what I am, and it is enough." Not perfect, not finished, not without complexity or contradiction, but enough, real, worth being. If you covered your face in the mirror, it is time to take your hands away. Not for anyone else, not to perform self-confidence for the world, but for you, in private first, in the quiet of the exact same moments where you have always hidden it. You don't have to show anyone. You just have to stop hiding it from yourself. Now, here's where all four choices converge, where the specific thing you recognize in yourself connect to something much larger and much more important. Carl Jung did not develop the concept of the golden shadow as a comfort or consolation. He developed it as a diagnosis, a precise psychological observation about what happens to human beings in a culture that systematically rewards conformity and punishes authentic selfhood. He observed, across thousands of patients, across decades of clinical work, across his own profound and painful inner journey, that the people who suffered most were not the ones who had done the most terrible things. They were the ones who had denied themselves most completely. The suppression of the golden shadow, the burying of your ambition, your voice, your depth, your self-worth, does not make you safer. It does not make you more lovable. It does not protect you from rejection or judgment or loss. What it does, over time, is create what Jung called a psychic imbalance. The buried gold does not stay buried quietly. It exerts pressure. It creates a low, persistent background suffering, a sense of wrongness, of incompleteness, of living at half capacity that is impossible to fully explain and impossible to fully silence. You may have spent years trying to address that suffering through external means, through achievement, through relationships, through constant self-improvement, through trying to become a better enough version of yourself that the discomfort would finally stop. But the discomfort was never about what you had not yet become. It was about what you had buried of who you already are. This is what the psychologist James Hollis, one of the most important voices in Jungian scholarship of the last century, described when he wrote that the unlived life is the source of the greatest suffering most people will ever know. Not the life they live badly, the life they never allowed themselves to live at all. And here is what this means practically. Here is what you can actually do with what you discovered today about yourself. If you chose option A, if your hidden goal is your ambition, the practice is permission. Explicit, spoken, written permission. You need to take the thing you want, the real version, the full-size version, not the edited save version, and say it out loud, to yourself first. Then, gradually, to one person who has earned the right to hear it, not to seek their validation. Their validation is irrelevant. You say it out loud because the act of speaking it begins a process of making it real, of moving it from the shadow into the light of your actual life. If you chose option B, if your hidden gold is your voice, the practice is expression without an audience. Before you can speak to the world, you need to speak to yourself. Write the thing you would say if you knew no one would ever read it. Make the thing you would create if you knew no one would ever see it. Sing at full volume when you are alone. Let the real expression happen first in private, where the silencing voices have no power, and discover for yourself what it actually feels like to be uncensored. If you chose option C, if your hidden gold is your depth, the practice is integration, not isolation. The interior world you are protected is real and valuable and worth protecting. But depth that is never shared eventually becomes a private prison. Choose one person, one careful, worthy person, and let them see one room of your interior world, not the whole house, just one room. Watch what happens. The right people will not be overwhelmed. They will be honored. If you chose option D, if your hidden gold is your self-acceptance, the practice is a mirror, literally. This week, once, alone, in the privacy of your own space, stand in front of a mirror. Don't fix your hair. Don't arrange your expression. Look at yourself the way you have learned to look at the people you love most, with recognition, with patience, with a willingness to see what is genuinely there, and say, out loud, one specific thing that is true and good about who you are. Not a compliment, a recognition. The difference matters. A compliment is something someone else gives you. A recognition is something you have always known, and are finally saying. Jung wrote, near the end of his life, that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your parents needed you to be, not who your culture rewarded you for being, not the edited, acceptable, safe version of yourself that learned to survive by staying small. Who you truly are, the person holding the flame, the person who has been screaming on the inside, the person with the door pressed shut, the person with their hands over their own face. Those images are not images of damage. They are images of interrupted becoming, of a self that was interrupted mid-expression and learned to wait. The waiting does not have to continue. I want to leave you with something Jung said that I have been thinking about for a long time. He said, the gold is in the dark, and the dark is in you, and therefore the gold is in you. He didn't mean that your suffering contains your potential. He meant something more specific and more demanding than that. He meant that the precise places in yourself you have been most afraid to look, the ambition you've been ashamed of, the voice you've silenced, the depth you've hidden, the self-worth you've covered, those specific places are not the problem. They are the answer. The part of you that you hope no one ever sees is a part of you the world has been waiting for. Before you go, I need to know something. Which image did you choose? A, B, C, or D? Tell me in the comments right now. And I want you to go one step further. Tell me, in one sentence, the thing you have been hiding. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. Just name it. Because the moment you name it in writing, even anonymously, even in a YouTube comment section at midnight, something shifts. That's what this work actually looks like. Not dramatic, not sudden. One small act of honesty at a time. Leave your letter below. And if this video found you tonight, if something in these 4 images cracked something open that has needed opening for a long time, then there's one more thing I want you to see. Because in the next video, we go even deeper. We take the specific archetype your shadow is protecting, and we follow it all the way back to the exact moment it was buried. That video will change how you understand your entire story. I'll see you there. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung.